So it started now, I think. This video will be about some metaphysics I've come up with. And I could say a lot about it, but I decided just to make a short video to summarize it using this picture. And I'll attach a link to a Google document I've written. My original plan was to make a long series of videos, like each about 5 minutes long, to explain all these different things. But I decided it's really easier just to give you the text that I've written, because it's easier for me to explain some things in text than with words. So I'll just try to give brief summaries about this picture. This picture actually took a lot of thought, and the document I'm going to attach is actually 17 pages. So every single little thing in this picture, there's a lot of details that go with it, but I'll just start explaining. Each of the things in one of these circles, like this reason in the red circle, and the morals in the blue circle, and the facts in the yellow circle, I believe that each of these things requires like faith to believe in it. And that's because you cannot derive, you can't derive reason either from morals or from facts. And you can't derive facts from reason and things like that. So if you have a materialistic worldview, basically that means you don't have any morals. You don't believe morals are a real thing, so that would make you a moral nihilist. And you'd believe in this reason and facts circle. So you'd basically be limited, your worldview would be limited to math and science and observation. There's a lot of detail here. I guess I'll just start explaining it, and hopefully it'll start to make sense eventually. And the reason these arrows are here is because morals are the most abstract of these topics, and then reason is a little bit less abstract and more concrete, and then facts are the most concrete. And the reason I say that is because you can see, observe facts, with your eyes, if you're there. You can't see reason, but which makes it more abstract, but you can prove there is such an idea in reason, such as consistency. If there's an inconsistent idea, you would say it's unreasonable. So therefore reason is a little bit more concrete than morals, because it's not easy to come up with any sort of moral idea and to prove that it's true. So that's why these arrows are here. I'll use science as an example first for the causal direction. If you're a scientist, then you would believe that the laws of physics, which are like mathematical statements, cause observable reality, and that's this green arrow here. But when you want to test your idea to see if it's true, you go back along this blue arrow. So science is going back and forth between this blue and green arrow right here, between reason and facts. And that's basically the scientific method. You come up, like I said, you come up with an abstract idea. If it's a good idea, you can write it down mathematically if it's really good, like F equals ma. And then if F equals ma is true, then it means that that particular mathematical statement causes particular manifestations of facts in the real world, like you can observe it. So you test your idea using facts. So the F equals ma theoretically causes observations in the real world, and therefore you use your observations to test to see if your idea is true. And in a similar way, you can do that between morals and reason. You can assume morals a priori, like you assume maybe, utilitarianism assumes that something like the greatest good for the greatest number is best. And so you assume that, and then if you assume that, you can apply logic to it and see what the necessary consequences of your belief are, and that would be the philosophy of utilitarianism. And you can pick different morals, different moral ideas, and they would give you different philosophies. Like Ayn Rand's objectivism assumes that basically, to me it seems like their assumption comes from the fact that our emotions seem to exist in order to achieve evolutionary success. And so her idea is pretty closely related, it seems to me, to survival of the fittest, and she comes up with her philosophy based on that moral statement. And utilitarianism is just based on satisfying people's emotional desires. And there are all sorts of different philosophies, like Immanuel Kant came up with the categorical imperative, and each of those assume their own little moral assumption, and then the philosophy is using reason to see what the effect is. And the reason I put philosophy in a separate bubble from facts is that it seems to me that those morals, like those people can never prove their moral idea. The moral idea is just assumed a priori, and then they, when you assume that, there is a certain set of, if you also assume reason, then there's a certain set of consequences that come from that moral assumption, and that's philosophy. And the reason I put religion in the middle is because, although you don't have to agree that any particular religion is true, I think, to understand this bubble, but a religion says that there was like some sort of deity who did particular actual things in the real physical world, and therefore they are attaching their moral philosophical ideas to actual physical reality. And so when that happens, it actually becomes more like a life philosophy. But there can be good facts and bad facts, like if you say the sky is red, that is a fact, but it happens to be false, and you can see that it's false because you can use your eyes and see that it's false. And reason, you could say like 1 + 1 = 3, and that would be a rational statement, but it would also be false, because you can, if you're a mathematician, you can probably show there's some sort of inconsistency in that. Reason is consistent. If reason is consistent, then it means it's good. That's the test for reason. And there's no test for morality to see that it's good. It's just assumed a priori. Unless you believe in some sort of God, and then you believe God made the morals. And then you would be in this middle bubble religion. And so I've talked about science and philosophy, about how they mean going back and forth between these arrows. I hope you can see that in science is in between reason and facts, because you cannot use science unless you use both reason and facts. And the reason I put reason and facts in one bubble is that you can't derive your sensory experience from anything else, and you can't derive your reason from anything else. Although, as I discussed, I believe reason and facts are very closely related, because I think facts are manifestations of rational ideas. But if you want to see if your reason has any sort of effect on the world, like you can come up with any sort of random logical idea that would be consistent, like mathematicians have come up with infinite dimensional space, but physicists believe that space is made up of a finite number of dimensions, so you believe that if that means basically just from that one example you can show that there's infinitely many rationally consistent ideas that do not correspond to a physical reality, which is why you need science to figure out, to test your ideas to see if they make sense. But anyway, you'll probably notice there are arrows going through the circle this way, but there's nothing going this way. And I think the reason for that is when you make a practical decision, you just assume a priori some moral statement, and you assume you trust the facts that come out, and you just make the appropriate decision. So an example would be like if there were a hurricane that destroyed lots of homes, your moral assumption is that it's bad for people to be homeless, and the fact that you take for granted is that a hurricane just came through and destroyed a bunch of houses, and the practical decision is taking the immediate steps necessary in order to alleviate the situation. One other practical decision could be like how you can buy a car, like how you can save up money or maybe sell something else that you have, or like which policy you use if you take out a loan or something. That would be a practical decision if you want to buy a car. I think the point at which it would become a life philosophy is if you decided that your whole life purpose was around buying things and possessing them, and you came up with rational, consistent, like systematic ways of doing that. And that is actually sort of like capitalism. Actually, I think a lot of the disagreements people have about certain philosophical issues could be resolved if they describe clearly where they're putting their philosophy in this little bubble chart. Like some people, when they talk about capitalism, it seems to be resting somewhere here, and other people think it's like resting somewhere over here. And for some people, capitalism even seems to be like a life philosophy, like a religion. Like there's some like anarchist, capitalist, libertarian people who think that like base their idea on like the non-aggression principle. That's like a moral statement, and they say therefore anything that follows that principle is morally good, and it doesn't matter if it actually makes any sense in the real world. And that's why I would put that philosophy over here. but like a person who uses like maybe charts, like somebody who says like government interference in the economy generally causes like shortages and like unemployment and things like that. You could make more specific statements like that, but since that's dealing with observation and like not moral statements, you could theoretically put that in the science area. Although I think it would be a very weak science because it's very difficult to test that sort of hypothesis. You theoretically could, like you can look at different policies taken by different governments and show that there's some sort of correlation between like I don't know, the inflation rate and employment, and therefore it would become something like a science. And then like if you try to combine those two, like capitalism becomes a religion. So yeah, capitalism is just an example of something fuzzy that is a word that people use to talk about a lot of different things that are somewhat related. To me, they fit somewhere in here depending on what you're talking about. So I hope that makes sense. And I talked about science and philosophy going back and forth between morals and back and forth between reason and facts. I could give an example of something that goes all the way across, and that would be something like a life religion, or life philosophy or religion. And an example I can think of would be like if a CEO decides that he wants to make a lot of money, or maybe he decides like he wants to make the world better or somehow, and so he has some sort of idea like making money or fixing the world or something, or providing some sort of service that is very important to him. And the next thing he'll do is come up with a business plan which would fit more in this area. And so his a priori assumption, like his morals, informs his reasoning ability about what kind of company he wants to set up, and he makes his business plan with a reason. And then finally, his business plan can manifest in certain observable facts, like the employees he hires and the buildings and the equipment he buys and things like that. So the company actually, like the idea starts in a man's head, like maybe Henry Ford or somebody like that, and he has this idea and he wants to bring it forth into the world. And so it moves in this direction along this green arrow, and he makes a business plan in order to bring his idea about. And then when he executes his business plan, it becomes a fact in the physical world. And so the CEO's business plan goes like that. And that would therefore make it something like a life philosophy or religion according to this chart. And of course I could talk about like Christianity, which is very important to me in terms of this, but it's such a huge topic, it would be very hard to I'd have to pick like just a single aspect of Christianity, maybe like helping the poor or something like that, or like you'd have to talk about probably some idea of sin or something. But I believe Christianity would definitely fit in this region. But since it's such a huge topic, I'd have to cut it up into pieces to really use this chart on it. And then nihilism goes outside the chart, because nihilism in this chart basically means lack of belief in something. So if you don't believe that human reason is sufficient for like understanding the world, or if you just for some reason don't use your reason, like maybe you're some hysterical woman who like doesn't understand like anything, I don't know, or maybe you like come up with some sort of rational argument that like, I don't know, makes you think reason isn't reasonable. So then you would pretty much be stuck to just these two bubbles. And actually I think a lot of people are like that actually. They just never bother to use their reason. They like have moral judgments, and they like accept facts, and so they make a lot of practical decisions in their life, but they don't know where they're going because they never sit down and think about what they're doing for a little bit. So actually I think a lot of people are actually stuck in just these two bubbles. They want things which comes from morals, and they like accept that a physical reality exists, so they're in this bubble too. But like I said, they never sit down and think about like, does their life make sense, and therefore like these areas are like completely cut off for them. They don't exist in these bubbles. And there are other people I could think of. In my opinion, anarcho-capitalists would exist in these two bubbles. That would be an entirely different video where I think it's an entirely like it can never manifest in reality. But like I think there are certain philosophical types that are so stuck in their own head they never bother to bring their ideas forth into reality, or to see if their ideas can actually work in the real world, and therefore they're stuck in these two bubbles. And then of course, like I was like this before. I was a moral nihilist, had a sense of reason, and I accepted that facts existed, so I was stuck in these two bubbles, and I didn't believe in things like morals. Or I recognized that people had moral opinions, but I didn't believe they were real. So I was basically stuck thinking about these two things. And I think to be a whole person, you need to fit in this middle bubble. And I believe there are true facts and false facts, like I talked about, true, like good reason and bad reason, like a bad reasoning would be if there was some sort of inconsistency. And I believe there are good morals and bad morals too. But I'll talk about this in the document that I'm going to attach, but I won't talk about it now. I don't think it's possible for human reason or facts to derive morals, which is why it's in its own bubble. So I think you need some sort of religion in order to believe that your morals have to base your morals on any sort of solid foundation. And I believe Christianity is the right one. But I can talk about that more in the document. And the document's only like vaguely related to Christianity, actually, but I base my understanding of religion on this picture, basically. And I think that's probably good enough further explanation I gave. If you thought this chart was interesting and my explanation of it was interesting, then read the document I'm going to attach. And that'll be the end of this video.